We are talking constitutional rights with Daniel in September. He is one of our senior legal advisors. Welcome, Daniel. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Lovely to be here.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, just as an introduction?
I'm one of the legal advisors here at Legal&Tax Services. I've been working here just under a year and I'm enjoying it tremendously so far.
Oh, that's very good to hear. So, we've got a fairly large team of legal advisors, and we specifically chose Daniel because he's got a particular interest in constitutional law, which is what we are discussing today. We're going to be following the theme of Human Rights Month, as we recently celebrated Human Rights Day on the 21st of March. And we've got some questions, and I think quite a few people have questions about how our human rights actually work. Of course, as a country that's famous for having a fairly amazing, actually, democratic constitution, there's often backwards and forwards about whether or not we feel like we actually have the rights that we're given by this constitution. So Daniel's going to tell us a little bit more about how these rights actually work. Take it away, Daniel.
All right. Well, the basis of today's webinar is human rights, and human rights are the rights that we feel as human beings that we should always have. To be put very, very simply. I actually was looking around the internet for some great definition for it, but all the definitions are pretty much the same. It's the rights that we feel as human beings that we should have and that we deserve to have, and that creates a situation where we have been empowered by the government that we chose. As far as our human rights are concerned in South Africa, you correctly said that we do have a fantastic constitution. We are very happy with the constitution, and anyone that has had the privilege to study constitutional law would know how progressive and how advanced our constitution is in relation to a lot of other countries around the world. Human rights is entrenched in our constitution. The entirety of chapter 2 is completely based on the Bill of Rights. It's entrenched in there. In order for any constitutional amendment to be made, Parliament actually needs to have a special majority before they can make any changes with regards to the constitution. So the writers of the constitution actually entrenched those laws and made it extremely difficult for those laws to be changed. And that's something that we should be relatively happy about as South Africans. They had the foresight and they had the experience, especially considering our not so distant past, where they attempted to secure these rights for all South Africans.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly difficult for the average human to understand how much it took for our constitution to get to the place that it was, or that it is now, because obviously the previous constitution of this country was anything but democratic. So there was a massive process, and it also involved the public. There was an interview with Justice Albie Sachs, where he explained that we're one of the few countries that actually used the people's voice as part of the building of our constitution back before 96, obviously. But I think the figure was about 2 million people responded to the call for public participation in the building of our constitution.
Absolutely, and that participation can be seen in the Bill of Rights as well. There are certain rights within the bill itself that you don't find anywhere else. The entrenchment of the right to freedom of association, for instance, is something that's not commonly found in constitutions around the world, but it's in ours, and that is directly as a result of the participation of the public and of the masses, if I could put it that way, in creating the constitution and our constitutional framework.
Absolutely. And that constitutional framework, again, is something that was discussed at length, because I actually forget who said it originally, but it was discussed as the way in which our constitution had to change when it was being rebuilt, because it's a fairly young constitution, could not be built in a similar way to America's constitution, for instance, which was a small group of people that then built a constitution that's been kind of amended and added to over the last 300 years, whereas ours had to just be a framework that it completely and utterly was devoted to human dignity and building from there upwards, as opposed to trying to shoehorn dignity in later. So.
Sure, and well, I do feel like we had an advantage when it came to building our constitution, because we got to start fresh. In places like America or England or other constitutional democracies, it's they have the same limitations in amending their constitutions as we do, where anything that's in the constitution is relatively entrenched, and in order to change something, there needs to be a special majorities and special uh, procedures in order to change something specifically. With our constitution, we got the chance to start from scratch, and I think that created a much better building block than what America had, for instance, or what the other countries have, where
Yeah.
they have to amend their constitution. We started afresh, and we got the chance to create something that would lead to something that the founders or the creators of this constitution envisaged one day, which is the free and equal and dignified South Africa.
Yeah. And I think it's something that is deeply entrenched within all South Africans, is that we have these rights. And I think a lot of us are not entirely sure how they work. So, like, the upholding of our rights versus the delivering on our rights, and like whether or not someone can take our rights away from us. So, like, what are the, like, for instance, what kind of a situation would it take for us to have our rights removed from us?
Well, the thing with rights is everybody has them, and if everyone is enjoying absolute freedom, for instance, then those absolute freedoms would overlap with each other. So in order to circumvent that overlapping, and in order to circumvent chaos, really, what the founders of our constitution did was they inserted section 36 of our constitution, and section 36 is the most important part of the constitution, because it's the limitation clause. So what section 36 actually says is that any rights that's ingrained in the constitution, or any human right, can be limited in certain circumstances. Now, the idea is, or the basis is, that human rights can't be taken away from someone, and we try very hard, and the lawmakers try to implement this as much as possible, where they try to leave the person with as much rights as they can, but they do understand that rights need to be limited. um, I think of a very telling expression that I've heard once, where someone says, you have the right to swing your arm anywhere as long as it doesn't touch my face. The moment it touches,
Pretty
the
good
moment
one.
it touches, yeah, but the moment it touches my face, then your right to swing your arm needs to be balanced against my right for your hand not to hit my face. And these rights are going to interact with each other in that way. So
Yeah.
it's not just a matter of having rights, it's a matter of having rights and limiting them so that we can interact properly with each other as well. And
Yeah.
all the rights in the constitution are going to be limited in terms of those considerations.
Well, this is it, is that I think a lot of us will be very familiar with our rights, like my right to freedom of speech, freedom of association, my right to life, my right to, it's often my right, as opposed to our rights, and the fact that they are kind of knitted together, because our rights don't really work unless everybody is upholding those rights. So Like, you can uphold your right to life by ensuring that you don't kill people. Pardon the
Well,
blunt example.
well, I suppose that would be someone else's right to life. If I'm killing people, I'm still alive. But you're absolutely right. There's still there's absolute limitations to these things. If I go through the Bill of Rights, for every right you just mentioned, I can quickly give you an example where that is not necessarily absolute. The right to life is not an absolute. In South Africa, in my opinion, thankfully, we did away with the death penalty. But there would be people that would argue that, say, for instance, abortion would be an infringement of the right of life. Um, the right to freedom. If you commit a serious enough crime, um, the courts and our justice system can limit your right to freedom by detaining you and putting you in prison. Um, so every single right is has its limitation within a democratic society, um, and and I think that what's important to understand is governments allow for these rights. So it's the government has an overarching function to ensure that the people that live inside of its borders live in a secure, free manner. But they also need to live together, and they need to live or try to live harmoniously. But
Yeah.
if you're just going to have a situation where everyone is free to do everything they want, then you are going to be favoring certain groups. So in some areas, it could be the biggest, strongest people, or the people with the biggest numbers, or whatever, the people with the best weapons. It could be any of those things. So those freedoms need to be limited as much as possible, or not as much as possible, but
As
where
much as
needed.
makes sense in the society to ensure that it works.
Yes, yes. I mean, some of as much as great as human rights are, and as great as our constitution is, um, some of the most powerful countries in the world have succeeded despite not having these things. So it's not it's in itself an indication of success or prosperity. It's just a guideline as to what we need to do in order to live together harmoniously. um so your human rights isn't something that should be looked at selfishly. Like you said earlier, I look at my rights. It's something that you need to understand belongs to everyone.
Yeah.
It's something that we share with each other. It's not something that we keep to ourselves.
Yeah. I think for the most part, people do forget that it is very much, yes, I have this right, but at the same time, I have this responsibility. And it can be difficult because I know that at one point, the Minister of Education back in 2008, they were trying to come up with a bill of responsibilities. And it didn't really get further than, I think, primary school education.
I can imagine that it wouldn't get very far. Look, responsibilities and rights are virtually polar opposites of each other. People love
Mm,
rights. People hate responsibilities.
yeah,
So people, if you give a person the option to gravitate towards a right or to gravitate towards a responsibility, he's going to go towards the right, because he's going to see the benefit in the right, and see the difficulty in the responsibility. um but but the reality is that accepting these rights actually creates a responsibility in themselves. And that is something that South Africans would do well to acknowledge and accept.
mm,
Um, the right to freedom of speech. We know that right is limited. There are certain things that you can't say. There's certain things that you can't utter.
yeah,
There are still certain things that you can get punished for saying. Um, but these things are weighed against the damage that those utterances can cause.
yeah,
So so it's paramount that the rights that we have, we use responsibly. Again,
Yeah.
it's like that Spider-Man saying, with great power.
With power comes great responsibility.
Precisely. So it's exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Our constitution grants us enormous power because of the Bill of Rights. And it is in our responsibility to administer that power responsibly.
And it's fascinating because as much as the Constitution may not be universal, we do have the Universal Declaration for Human Rights turned 75 this year. And that
Yeah,
comes with equal amounts of responsibility. And it's an international phenomenon where one does tend to gravitate towards the rights, as you said, and not so much the responsibilities. So
absolutely.
I think it is definitely something that as a citizen of the world, as well as South Africa, it is something that we face, and the fact that we do have this phenomenal power as far as our rights go, but there needs to be an understanding of the fact that the rights are not going to help us unless we take the responsibility to ensure that those rights are realized.
Right. And to ensure that those rights are not just realized for us, but for other people, and for people that we don't necessarily agree with. I mean,
Yeah.
another part of our Bill of Rights, of course, is the freedom of religion. So you could have someone who has a different religion or a different belief system that you don't necessarily agree in, but they have
Mm,
a right to practice that belief system,
mm,
and learning to accept people and learning to advance with people of different cultures and different religions
mm,
is part of what this constitution and our constitution in particular tries to promote. As far as the the UN's Bill of Rights, 75 years old. You're absolutely correct, um, and very, very importantly, always changing.
really.
Right. I mean, initially it was just a few rights, and it's become a lot more comprehensive over as time has progressed.
Mm,
And I think that is also something that as South Africans we should be aware of and we should encourage.
mm,
Um, Human rights is not stagnant. They are not. They are not words written on a piece of paper that should be the same words for perpetuity.
mm,
They are. It's a concept. It's a living idea, and it
mm.
should progress and develop as time continues.
That's really fascinating because I think particularly, I mean, I'm standard to be corrected, but I think the American populace does tend to believe that their constitution is immutable and must never be changed because their rights must never be changed. But there's definitely something to be said for the fact that like as human beings learn more about what it is to be human and what it is to interact with other humans, that our rights change and grow and develop as we learn. So it'd be interesting to see what our human rights, or at least the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, looks like in 10, 20, or 50 years' time.
Well, I hope it develops. I hope it changes, and I hope it progresses,
Mm,
even slightly. But even if you look at humanity in the last 100 years, with regards to how we've developed and how we've changed, something that was a human right, or something that is a human right now, would not necessarily be a human right 100 years ago.
no.
Um, e- even even America with its um, fanatical ideas about how entrenched the Constitution is, they have like something like 300 amendments.
Yeah.
So so they obviously change it as well. And that is the growth, and that is the thing that you want to see with your constitution and with your laws. You want them to be adapting to the society that they find themselves in. You want them to be changing. You want them to be accommodating to new things and to new
Mm,
technologies and to new ways of thinking. And as long as that's happening, then I feel that human rights are going to be in a good space.
yeah.
Um, of course, working at Legal and Tax, the more interesting question is artificial intelligence rights.
Ooh, yeah, that's going to be a big debate. In fact, I'm keen to do a webinar on that soon because, like, the intellectual property rights versus like the rights of people who've taken advice from like AI lawyers and things like that. And then
Sure.
it's going to be a minefield.
Yes, no, look, it's
um,
not something that I've particularly applied my mind to yet, but I do find it interesting, and I'm actually quite glad that Legal and Tax is going down that avenue as strongly as they have, because it's an interesting aspect of our future, and how
mm,
things are going to progress in our future, and it opens up more questions with regards to human rights and our particular rights in future, because that is the what I would think would be the next frontier. All
yeah.
right, and that is going to be need to be incorporated with our legal system as well at some point.
Absolutely, and it's going to be really fascinating because I mean, obviously, as machine learning and large language models progress, we learn more about the process of learning, and it's been fascinating from the perspective of somebody like me, who's obviously our content person, to watch the way that AI has started to influence what I do and the kind of work that I look at, and then obviously we always reference where we get our sources and the people that we consult. And when you look at the intellectual property around that, you're working with like one or other of the AI services that will remain nameless, it's one does start to kind of question that from a completely different angle. So the introduction of AI and other machine learning opportunities makes you question everything that touches, because you've now got to
Sure.
look at it from a totally different perspective.
Right. And I couldn't even fathom how it's going to affect us in future. It's going to be all encompassing. It's going to touch every part of our lives. And I hope that in future our human rights are ingrained to such a degree that we don't lose that aspect of us,
Mm,
as machine learning and as AI become a part of our daily lives.
yeah,
So those things are important as well. I mean, um, there's a lot of progression when it comes to technology as such, and technology also creates certain let's say difficulties, especially when it comes to human rights.
yeah,
When you think about where technology is applied, firstly, it's normally applied in situations of conflict.
yeah.
And in the past, technology was always used as a stepping stone towards advancing someone's military might. And
Arthros, that
and
kind of thing.
right, and so human rights plays a huge part in that particular aspect as well. I mean, wars, how you treat prisoners of war, the populace of countries that you invade, um, what happens when you leave a country. These
Mm,
things are all things that need to be touched upon and need to be looked at, in terms of the human right aspects of it, and that is where the 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 caution needs to be brought in when it comes to advancing these new technologies. We don't know how AI is going to interpret these things.
yeah.
Human rights might be something. be- Human rights might be something that's not important to AI. It could look at the world holistically and determine, well, they like being told what to do more than they like being free. I don't think
I
that's true, but
I
but
think it
but
will
but
depend
it could
greatly
be.
on the corpus that those particular neural networks are trained on. Um,
Sure.
but I understand one's trepidation.
So yes. So I think that there needs to be caution. I think that it would be wise that if we go down that avenue, that human rights is probably one of the first things that we teach AI.
Yeah.
Um, and any AI that's learning our constitution, for instance, will get that basis in the first place. So that is also a very good step.
That's a really interesting point. I hadn't thought of the fact that, like, I mean, so our upcoming article for April, when our newsletter goes out, is based on the Constitution and the fact that we have these amazing freedoms, and the fact that we've actually our Constitution has been used in the writing and developing of other constitutions over time.
Sure.
What I hadn't thought of was the fact that obviously it is something that can be used to train AI. like in terms of the fairness, and the article will be called OSA, the fairest of them all. But like in terms of the value of that and the fact that it is a deeply balanced and what's the word, with dignity at its heart.
Right.
We are quite unique in that perspective. So in terms of AI training material, that's some solid gold, proper Igoni
No,
gold, right
no,
there.
I agree. No, look, I agree. I think that it's our constitution literally is one of the best documents ever written. And I could be biased, but I don't think so. Um,
Well, a little bit biased.
but I think it would be a great starting point for anyone. When you start studying law, you start really with your basics of law and your basics of the Constitution, and it gives you a platform from which you grow, and it teaches you how to think about matters that will be dealing with in future, even if they're not directly dealing with the Constitution. You understand how the Constitution touches every part of the legal system,
Yeah,
and that is critical to know, because we've had clients, well, we get clients at on helpline, or when I was in practice, in practice, that believe that everything is an infraction of their rights, and that's probably true. The problem is that um, there are these limitations in place, and the way that the legal system works is it's a web of ideas and laws and theories that come together and create our legal system. And the strongest building block for that web, or the thread that keeps the entire web together, is our constitution. And that constitutional web, thread will touch every part of that web.
yeah,
So it is really the most important part of our legal system. It's the most important part of being South African at this point in time, and it's the basis of how we should live our lives.
yeah.
If you live according to the Constitution, you shouldn't ever see the inside of a courtroom, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think that's been a really like quite fascinating discussion. We've got a couple of attendees. So if anybody does have any questions that they'd like to ask Donjan, our fantastic legal advisor, who's been very generous with his time, so thank you. Anybody? I can see your name, so I won't necessarily call you out individually, but I would suggest that if you do have any questions, now's the time to ask. No hands. Obviously, of course, at Legal&Tax, we're always available. We've got a fantastic legal advice line. Our once-off legal advice service is free. So when you have a question, you're always welcome to pop onto our website, and there's a service form. You can just fill in what it is that you need to know, and one of our legal advisors will get back to you. Donjan, thank you so much for a really fascinating conversation. This has been very, very cool. I'm definitely going to go and examine a little bit more about human rights and AI. I think everybody who attended is as well. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. And we will be doing another webinar in May. This is kind of covering the webinars for March and April. And keep an eye out for our newsletter, which will be coming out next week. And otherwise, we wish everybody a splendid weekend, which is coming up soon.